are very smart in that the first two things that they did after the war started was one, de facto close off the Strait of Hormuz, thus strangling the global economy, and then launching drone strikes against the GCC nations. Now, these drone strikes are extremely controversial, and there's a lot of debate about them. So, for example, at first it was reported that the Iranians used a drone to hit a Saudi Aramco oil facility, thus damaging the energy infrastructure of Saudi Arabia. And that's grounds for a declaration of war. But later it was reported that actually this drone came from the west in Lebanon rather than from the east. And the Iranians actually denied this, saying that we want to protect our oil facilities just as much as you want to protect your oil facilities. So why would we give you a reason to come attack our oil facilities, right? We're better off attacking U.S. bases. We're better off attacking the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. We won't waste our precious ammunition targeting oil fields. And also, Tucker Carlson on his show told us that he was told by the Qataris that they had arrested two Mossad agents suspected of infiltrating Qatar in order to commit false flag sabotage operations. And the Qataris have denied this report, but we can suspect that this is true because it really is the Mossad MO. So the GCC nations are the ones that are in real trouble because of this war, not only because the Iranians want to destroy the American military's capacity to supply ammunition, but also because the Israelis want to drag the GCC nations into this war and create a regional conflagration, especially Saudi Arabia. Because remember, in the Greater Israel Project scheme, eventually Israel needs to take on Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey. So why not just drag Saudi Arabia into this war and have Iran destroy Saudi Arabia in order to lessen the conflict later on?
And yet, Professor, it's raining oil in Tehran today, and I dare say also in Haifa, because for the first time in the war, and it's a war that's lasted a whole week, which is a long time by today's standards, the oil depots of Iran were apparently completely destroyed. And the streets, the very streets of Tehran, are on fire. In retaliation, the major oil depots for Israel in the city of Haifa have been struck and are also on fire. So we're now in for a tit for tat on destroying oil production. In those circumstances, with oil heading for $150 a barrel, maybe even $200 a barrel, ineluctably, if there are more attacks on Iran's oil infrastructure, the Iranians will strike the Arabian side of the Persian Gulf to create not $200 a barrel, but no price per barrel at all. You'd be putting a barrel of oil in the Louvre.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're seeing is the escalation ladder climbing, right? So at first, I think all sides decided to focus on military targets. And now what they're doing is they're switching to soft targets that do economic damage. So the Americans struck a desalination plant in Iran. And so now thousands of Iranians will not have access to fresh water. And the Iranians responded by targeting a desalination plant in Bahrain, okay? So we have to understand that this is now total war, meaning that to destroy each other, they need to destroy each other's economies. And this marks a new world. We can't possibly return to the old world where you could access energy for cheap. In the future, and I'm talking about maybe in a year or two, every nation will have to engage in massive deindustrialization because they can no longer access cheap oil. More and more nations will start to engage in mercantilism, and they need to create their own self-sufficient supply chains. And the nation that is in most dire need right now is actually Japan. because Japan is an extremely wealthy country, but it's completely dependent on global supply chains. It receives about 75% of its oil from the Strait of Hormuz. And Prime Minister Takaichi, in a speech, said that in 7 to 8 months, Japan will run out of oil and energy, thus threatening its entire economy. So the ultimate reverberations, the consequences of what's happening will be felt only a few weeks from now. But we should expect a massive global depression to appear on the horizon very soon. And basically, the old world order of global trade is dead, and it will never return in our lifetimes. That's the reality we're facing right now.
Now, as Sherlock Holmes might put it, the shoe that hasn't dropped in your discourse thus far is China. China has strategic relations with Iran. In fact, the Strait of Hormuz is not closed, but it is gated. And the Chinese oil tankers are, of course, being allowed through the gate. China is a global superpower, the greatest manufacturing power on the earth. So in deindustrializing West, China's industrial power would see it through. But that's, of course, an invitation for war to be waged against China. Many people believe that the attack on Iran, indeed even the attack on Russia through Ukraine, are mere precursors from the real Armageddon, if I can put it that way, a US-China conflict. How do you feel about that?
I think over the next 2 months, 2 to 3 months, people's understanding of China, people's understanding of how the world works will radically shift. At the end of this month, Trump is scheduled for a state visit to Beijing. And this is his first state visit in his second term. And I don't think a sitting American president has visited China in the past 8 years. So this is a very big deal. And in fact, this meeting at the end of the month is just one of 3 planned meetings this year. And the reason why this is happening is that China and America plan a rapprochement. They plan a grand bargain to reset the international order. And the reason why is that there are 2 nations that have benefited the most from globalization. They are the United States and they are China. They are symbiotic. They are codependent. So America has its market and China has a manufacturing export economy. And China doesn't have a domestic consumer base. So China is completely reliant on exports, and it imports resources, as primarily energy and food, in order to feed its manufacturing base. So it is in China's best interest to come to an arrangement with America as soon as possible. And even though you could make the argument that Trump's actions in Venezuela, Trump's actions in Iran are to strangle the Chinese economy, I think that we can test this hypothesis in a month or two when Trump and Xi meet and come to a grand bargain. I think people, again, will be surprised and shocked by what will happen. It is entirely possible that China agrees to buy American oil rather than Iranian oil. It is entirely, right now, China imports a lot of energy needs from the Middle East, Qatar especially. And this war in the Middle East, it's not going to go away, and China needs to meet its energy needs. China imports 75% of its oil, and 60% of its energy supply comes from the Middle East. So I would not be surprised if Trump and China were to come to an agreement where China becomes America's energy consumer.
Now, let's go back to the original for the last question, Professor, and I'm grateful for your time. Is there an off-ramp anywhere that can stop this catastrophe, that can stop this hurtling towards the end of times in the Middle East? could Trump declare victory in some bogus way and pack it up?
So we are in a situation because the United States presented Iran with three impossible demands. These three impossible demands are zero uranium enrichment, even for civilian purposes, to abandon its proxies in the Middle East, the Houthis, Hezbollah, the Shia militias in Iraq, Hamas, and to end or drastically reduce its ballistic missiles program. Okay, so these are three impossible demands, because basically what America says is that if you give up the right to defend yourself, we might not attack you. Oh, and by the way, we're not going to lift sanctions. So we're still going to strengthen you economically, but we might be nice to you if you accede to our demands. So these are impossible demands. And it was clear at that point that the Americans were looking for a pretext to attack Iran. Trump's envoys in these negotiations were Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. And these are two ardent Zionists who are close to Netanyahu. And we all know that Netanyahu wanted war. Steve Witkoff, during the negotiations, went on TV and said that, oh, the Iranians are like 1 or 2 weeks away from weapons-grade uranium arrangement, basically saying that the Iranians are negotiating in bad faith, okay? So the Americans did everything possible to make sure that the Iranians could not agree to peace, and they were just looking for a pretext for war. Nonetheless, a few hours before the Israelis actually attacked Iran, the Omani foreign minister, the Omanis were the ones who were mediating the negotiations, went on TV and said that the Iranians had compromised. The Iranians had agreed to zero uranium enrichment, even for civilian purposes, which before was a red line. And he also said that the Iranians were willing to negotiate with regard to their proxies as well as to their ballistic missiles program. And then what happened a few hours later? Well, the Americans and the Israelis killed their supreme leader. Okay? So another way of saying this is that for whatever reason, and we can argue about what the reasons are, the Americans and the Israelis are intent on war. And the reason why they have not articulated a strategy and a reason and a purpose is they want to maintain maximum flexibility, which means that they want to destroy Iran's capacity to be a nation state. They want to bomb Iran back to the Stone Age. They want to divide Iran into ethnic enclaves that will be divided and ruled by Israel. And that's the ultimate purpose of this war. That's why the Americans are now targeting desalination plants. And that's why they're targeting Iran's energy infrastructure, right? So from the American perspective, they want to destroy Iran. And the Iranians recognize this. And that's why the Iranians have said that we will fight to the bitter end. So yeah, so maybe there will be some mediation. Maybe the GCC nations, maybe others like China will try to help negotiate a peace. But for whatever reason, the Americans are set on the destruction of Iran.